Hi, I'm Matt Hernandez, and this is Book Chat with You. In this and almost every episode, I try to make this be a conversation with you about literature. I love to hear what you think about, well, whichever literature we can try to discuss together. Sorry, I see that the lighting is not so good on this whenever and if ever I put this up for a video. I'm recording this outside and got a bit of a shout on myself. I've just moved back to the US and, well, I can already miss China. So was not able to put out a video within the last week. I simply had no time for it, or podcast, I should say. But now I'm here and I'm doing a podcast on another Carol Shield story called Dolls, 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 Dolls. Yep, 4 dolls together, not just one. So, this short story, it doesn't completely seem like a story. It seems a bit experimental. It seems a bit of something else because you do not see a clear story arc from what I see. Maybe somebody else can point it out to me, and maybe somebody else can see part of that story arc that I am kind of missing. It starts out where the main character receives a letter from her friend Roberta. Roberta sends her a letter about her trip to Japan, but part of this letter focuses on a city in Japan which focuses on doll manufacturing. And they manufacture dolls and just the whole process of, that they use human hair. This place only makes the heads of dolls. This place only makes that. Then somehow from there we get these meandering thoughts from the main character about dolls she had growing up and when she quit using dolls and a lot of that. So it would be kind of hard to continue describing the story without starting to kind of read part of it off and stuff. So I found some sections here, and I'm going to read part of it and give some thoughts because it's the only way that I can really go about the story. Okay, Roberta's party. So I'm reading here on the second page of the story. Roberta's party was brought to a small house in the middle of the village where the heads of geisha dolls were made. Just the heads and nothing else. After leaving their shoes in a small darkened foyer, they were led to a surprisingly wide, matted workroom that was cooled by slow-moving overhead fans. The air was musty from the mingled straw and dust, but the light from a row of latticed windows was softly opalescent, a distinctly mild non-industry quality of light, clean focused, and touched with the egg yellow of sunlight. Here in the workroom, 9 or 10 Japanese women knelt in a circle on the floor. They nodded quickly and repeatedly in the same direction of the tourists and smiled in a half shy, half neighborly manner, and they never stopped working for a second. Now, one thing that also gets me about this section, and this goes with a lot of the story, is that she's sort of giving us details she couldn't quite know because her friend wrote this letter. But do we think that Roberta had written this detail in this sense? I mean, what Carol Shields could have done is she could have just have plastered the Roberta's letter here in italics. So it's a bit of an interesting choice because at times we're getting the author's interpretation of something about what she's perceiving something there to happen. And it's a little interesting. So I'm skipping ahead a few pages because the first 4 pages or so of the story is just this about her friend having gone to this doll factory. And it looks like it might have stayed there, but nope. And then we get a big break from that, a big line on top. And then now on another paragraph, and I'll read part of this. Dolls, 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 dolls. Once I forgot why, I wrote those words on a piece of paper, and instantly they swam into incomprehension, becoming meaningless ruffles of ink, squiggles from a comic strip. Was it a Christmas wish list I was making? I doubt it. As a child, I would have been shocked had I received more than one doll in a single year. The idea was unworthy. It was unnatural. I could not imagine it. So that first part right there was one sentence. So Carol Shields is doing some interesting things here, and at times she gets these really long sentences here, which they're kind of hard to follow. In fact, this story is a good example about one that maybe we could only enjoy if we were looking at together. And in a sense, when I have these my own meandering thoughts, which sort of go off topic, it is in a sense respecting what she's trying to do here, and it's quite interesting. So, to continue a bit more and still reading off this, every year from the time I was born until until I was 10, I was given a doll. It was one of those certainties of life, a portion of a large enclosing certainty in which all the jumble of childhood lay. It now seems a long way back to those particular and inalterable surfaces, the vast and incomprehensible war. Miss Newberry, with her ivory-colored teeth, who was principal of Lord Durham Public School. So she's describing these dolls a bit as people, and we end up getting that a bit more throughout the story. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a bit, and then here. Okay, this one's a bit long. Here, we sat in the apartment under the lights of a bridge lamp, a circle of little girls on the living room rug, watching while the enormous box was untied. Inside was a doll. What kind of doll was it? I don't recall, except that her bronzed hair gleamed with a richness that was more than visual. What I do remember was the affection with which she was lifted from her wrappings of paper and pressed to Nanette's smoked bodice, how she was tipped reverently backward so that her eyes clicked shut. Okay, describing the dolls again. Then, as we skip ahead a bit, it says, in the suburbs of Paris was one of the finest archaeological museums in Europe. My husband had talked ever since I'd known him about going there. So, I mean, I do apologize in advance because maybe this would be a good one to show on the screen, but this sentence, it is a little bit incomprehensible. It's a single sentence there, and when it says my husband had talked about going there, there's like a comma there, and there's something Carol Shields is doing in which part of this would be a bit hard at moments to interpret, to comprehend. Okay, so here, my sister lives 300 miles away in Ohio. These days, I only see her 2 or 3 times a year, usually for family gatherings on long weekends. Then if I skip down to the next paragraph, my memory is sharper than hers. Now, as I'm doing this video, I'm beginning to wonder, is the main character's memory sharper than her sister's? Because with some of this kind of back and forth, some of these sentences as they are being written inside of somewhat of an unclear way, is her memory better than her sister's? It's a little unknown, perhaps. Then, below, it says, I asked my sister if she remembered how our dolls were presented to us, exactly the way real children are presented. Then it says, remember Nancy Lynn, one of the dolls, one of the early dolls. And then next paragraph, one wartime Christmas we were given our dolls, difficult to come by in those years of shortages. So, looking here, I could see that some of these stories in this collection were published in like the 1970s. The characters here are about 48 years old. So, when they talk about the war, they probably mean World War II. These stories are often very Canadian in nature. So, that's probably what they mean there. And this is probably also telling us about the time that this takes place in, because some of the parts, such as rubber, was hard to come by for the dolls. Okay, so we'll go on a bit. And then it says, so it kind of skips to something else. And it almost looks like the story could have become a sort of coming of age story, sort of coming out of innocence. It happened in the year where I grew up. A little girl was murdered. She was 10 years old, my age. It was a terrible murder. The killer entered her bedroom while she was sleeping. He stabbed her through the heart, cut off her head, and her arms and legs. Some of those pieces were never found. So this is a little bit of the story, right? Dolls, dolls, dolls. So I think there's something here I'm kind of missing. The girl, or the main character, and her sister, her friends, are kind of like the dolls, right? A girl her age was killed and torn apart like a doll. And so it says from there, they sort of put down their dolls and they sort of grow up a bit more. So here it says on the next page, we emerge from those dark closet meetings, dazed with heat and determination, and and then we would take to the streets. So the small band of children, of girls, decided to become somewhat detectives. I don't think anything comes of it, but it looks almost for a second like it's going to be, well, what is it called? Like Nate the Great, like a child's detective story for just as, I mean it's not, but you get that feeling just for a second while reading the story. And it is a long enough story. So then on the next page, so then it had said in the story that she abandoned her dolls, but then she doesn't quite. She still takes comfort in the dolls. And it says right towards the end of the story, in fact, and basically the last paragraph, including the last paragraph, there seems no sense to it. Only her power to protect me, human love, I saw, could not always be relied on. There would be times when I would have to settle for a kind of parallel love, an extension of my hidden self, hidden even from me. I saw it. It was something to be thankful for. Okay, you know, well, if you're still listening, I'm very thankful for that. So, being back in Las Vegas, in my home country, I find myself a little bit through having done all these English corners and stuff in China that I've learned to ask a lot of questions. And I'm getting very mixed results. I mean, maybe with one job interview, maybe I asked too many questions. Maybe with guests at a niece-in-law's basically party, maybe I asked a lot of questions to some people and they took very well to it, I think. I asked one individual, Chinese, Cantonese individual, he almost like kind of freaked out and worried about it, or like, I don't know, anxious, something. But I I enjoy asking questions, and I think it's very important. So when I say all these things, that I'd like to have this book chat with you, I do mean it sincerely because I'm living this question asking thing daily, or as much as I can. So I do want to ask you questions. I do want to ask you, how you are and everything like that. And some stories I read, or maybe the mood I'm in, if I had coffee, how well I slept, maybe what my children are doing. Some stories might provide me with more or less to chat with than others too, and based on my mood and stuff too. But nevertheless, I always want to have that spirit of chatting and asking questions and all that. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.